This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Is it really WrestleMania season? Doesn't seem like it. What are we now? A week out from that thing? Yeah. Well, you know how it goes. Get a little older, get a little more jaded, and the one big event of the year in professional wrestling that everybody usually looks forward to, then you sit here in your mid-30s and think, yeah, it's just not the same. And even if you've watched or listened to the SmackDown reviews, I mean, you've heard me cover that on the channel. WrestleMania used to feel special. Now it's just kind of a show with somewhat bigger production value. Crap, I still have to plan out a session on the Monday podcast to do a card preview. Haven't really figured that one out yet. I got time. That'll be for me to worry about when the Monday show rolls around. Right now, we got bigger fish to fry, because this is the Friday show, and it is Fish Fry Friday on the Five Starr Wrestling Report show. No, it's really not. God. Has anybody ever participated in those things at their church? I know it's sort of a big festivity that everybody participates in, but I don't know, I always kind of thought it was dumb. The food always tasted like garbage from what I've heard. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about professional wrestling. And we're also not here to talk about WWE, which is how I just kind of started the show with. We're here to talk about the other side of the aisle. The Retro Series rolls on. Likewise, my diminishing patience for AEW's product rolls on. I really tried to come up with a clever title to call this show. Honestly, the best I could come up with was The Dream Match Dud. It's not my best effort, but it's kind of what I thought after the show was over. Not just the match, the entire show as a whole. And I keep saying it every week. They need stars. They need big-time players. They need more captivating stories. They need Punk back is what they need. They got a pay-per-view in, 2 months? Some people may think that's a little ways out. Trust me when I say, it's really not. They dedicated an entire opening segment on last week's show to their designated 4 pillars of the company, and I use those air quotes intentionally. Regardless of what I thought about that segment, I still thought it sucked. The bottom line is, they had 3 guys go out there to try to plead their case for why they should be the number 1 contender, plus you have the world champion in there. On this show, they were all reduced to a 30-second pre-tape, and out of the 4 guys involved, the only one that was physically on the show in any capacity was Darby Allin. And he was in the opening tag as a body amidst a sea of 6 other dudes. So when you hear me come on here and talk about how AEW has a lack of credible top challengers to their world title right now, this is a clear-cut example of that. Jungle Boy, not physically on the show. Sammy Guevara, not physically on the show. And like I said, Darby Allin, he was a guy in a match. Not even being showcased in a one-on-one capacity like he probably should be. And that's only scratching the surface of some of the other problems with this one. You know, I thought about cracking open a cold one before the start of this thing, but still a little early to be drowning myself in my own misery. Now instead, here's what I'm going to do. I haven't done this in a while. Normally with the AEW reports, I try to run everything down in sequential order from the top. However, that also usually comes with the caveat that I bother actually trying to indulge with more than, 50% of the program. However, I have a lot on my mind about this main event. I've been stewing on this for a few days now, and my opinion has virtually nothing to do with AEW's piss-poor promotional strategies, because, you see, strategy implies that they even bothered trying to advertise this a week in advance. God forbid it would have taken them 5 seconds to throw up a goddamn graphic at the end of last week's show. Rather me having to read about this on the Wrestling Observer news page. And then I'm sitting there on the toilet while I was at work trying to figure out who this fucking Hijo del Fakingo dweeb was. Because this is apparently my job. I already work 3 paid jobs to begin with, but now AEW is adding a 4th occupation to my already overbloated schedule, where it's apparently my responsibility to figure out who 99% of these jabronis are on this show that show up out of the woodwork for no reason. It's my fucking job to watch every promotion in the world to try and figure out who these guys are, where they came from, and why they're wrestling on Dynamite. This has been the AEW mindset since 2019. Random indie geeks show up on the program unannounced, and everybody watching is just supposed to know everything about their background. We're supposed to know what companies they've worked for, what their movesets are, what their gimmicks are, whether they're face or heel, and, well, we're never provided any context. So you'll be shocked to hear, while I was hanging out on the can trying to squeeze out a 4-finger stinker, I happened upon an article from Wrestling Observer's website where they cover this alleged, supposed dream match that was going to be happening this week between Kenny Omega and Hijo del Fakingo. A dream match, by the way, that was apparently so important for them to book on this particular show, they couldn't even have the common courtesy of, explaining who this fucking Hijo del Fakingo guy was. I don't know. Last week? Like, my God, where do you even start with a fiasco like this? Well, first off, I think we should all try to have a rational conversation on the definition of a dream match and what a dream match actually constitutes in the world of professional wrestling. Because there's this weird, bizarre propaganda that's promulgated out there in the wrestling media that we're all supposed to view this Omega Vikingo match that took place on Wednesday as a dream match. So let's define terms for a minute here. What is a dream match in wrestling? Everyone's obviously going to have their different interpretations, but for sake of getting too deep in the weeds here, can we at least agree on the basic notion that dream matches in professional wrestling have traditionally been viewed as the big-time, high-profile matches that the vast majority of fans crave seeing? Since I have a copy of his book, I'll actually go ahead and just use it as a model for a reference here because it'll help paint the picture a bit better. Jim Cornette's Behind the Curtain graphic novel. In the final section, he devotes an entire page to his dream match card, pitting up a list of some of the biggest names that came through the business at one point. And this covers a wide range of guys from various generations. Bruno Sammartino versus Steve Austin. Andre the Giant versus The Big Show. Strangler Lewis versus Les Thatcher. Terry Funk versus Cactus Jack. Dick the Bruiser versus Brock Lesnar. Dusty Rhodes versus The Rock. Dynamite Kid versus AJ Styles. And those are just a few names that I jotted down before I started recording today. Now I want you to think about those names I just read off. Now let's analyze AEW's definition, aka the modern fans' interpretation of what a wrestling dream match is. Never you mind the other gaping issue with this whole discussion that I haven't even mentioned yet, the fact that this match was apparently such a high-value dream match, they decided to blow it off not on pay-per-view, but a random episode of Dynamite with less than 7 days build. But again, all those names I just fired off a second ago, Austin, Rock, Foley, Lesnar, Andre, Funk, that's Jim Cornette's interpretation of a dream match scenario. Here's AEW's modern-day dream match. Kenny Omega versus Hijo del Vikingo. And of course, my immediate reaction, along with many other people that watch this show every week, we hear the name Hijo del Vikingo, we all ask collectively, who the fuck is Hijo del Vikingo? Well, good question. I have no idea. I guess if you're not a fan of CMLL or AAA, which is like, you know, everyone. Obviously, you hear Excalibur name drop him in the first minute of the show with no graphics shown prior, and you're thinking to yourself, who is this guy? Where did he come from? Why is he wrestling tonight on Dynamite? And why the fuck should I care? And the answer to all of these questions is, I don't know. Because Tony decided that in his next desperate ploy for ratings, he decided, let's hotshot a random TV main event between one of our top guys and a guy from another promotion that nobody's ever heard of. And let's call it a dream match because it'll lure people into thinking this match is a bigger deal than it really is. So in other words, false advertising. But again, since they really didn't advertise it at all, is it really false advertising? And again, there's so much wrong with this just on the surface level of calling it a dream match when it's clearly fucking not. And anyone with half a brain could tell you that. The other half are the mouth-breathing basement dwellers that'll get all bent out of shape because 50% of the people watching never heard of this fucking guy and were never given any reason to care prior. But these are simply promotional blunders on Tony's end. I haven't even talked about the match yet. And again, keep in mind everything I already covered during my pre-match tangent. No idea who this Vikingo guy is. No idea what his moveset is. No idea whether or not he's a good guy or a bad guy. No idea about any of his personal background. Come to find out by the end, my suspicions of the kind of talent he would be was pretty much vindicated. I thought to myself, all right, I have no idea what this guy looks like. This was before I actually saw them throw up the graphic at the beginning of the show, so I'm thinking, okay, I'm trying to picture in my mind how I envision this guy to look. Well, turns out it was exactly as I figured. He's another generic small indie guy that does all the flips and dives, some of which look more impressive than others. And in terms of anything else that makes him stand out as an overall package, he's about as bland as it gets. He looks like he's 14 years old. Couldn't pick him out of a police lineup. Still never found out if the guy could cut a halfway decent promo, but I mean, considering we're in the realm of AEW, the answer is probably unlikely. I can tell you that his selling is downright atrocious, just based on the first 30 seconds of what happened in the match. Of course, there's a jump start, because every AEW match has to have a jump start. And it's Vikingo diving out to Omega onto the floor with a somersault plancha, after which he immediately goes back into the ring to hit another dive out to the floor, throws Omega back into the ring a few seconds later, only for Omega to then immediately cut him off. Keep in mind, the bell hasn't rung at all yet. This is all happening before there's even official start to the match. And probably within about 15 more seconds after Omega cutting him off in the corner, Vikingo is right back up, no selling everything, hitting Omega with more flippy big dives because, well, that's what everybody likes in wrestling, are the flippy moves. Now, of course, there's no drama or story to the flippy moves, which is why nobody fucking watches this shit anymore, because there's no one to root behind to see make a comeback, because everybody's a goddamn video game character with limitless energy. So after I saw them basically hit everything in the book within the first minute and a half of this thing, I ended up wondering, how in the world are they supposed to drag this on for another 20 plus minutes? Well, the answer was simply, you go back to the well with more video game moves. And before I just outright shit all over everything about this match, let me at least give Hijo del Vikingo a compliment in one domain. The dude's a hell of a freaking athlete. The acrobatic shit he pulled off in this match was really impressive. If this were taking place at the 2023 Olympics, I'd be sitting here applauding this guy for the best performance of the night. Unfortunately, here's the reality. This is supposed to be a professional wrestling show. Supposed being the applicable word there. So you see where the fault lies. Of course, there was a table involved, because even though it was never explicitly announced, I guess we were all supposed to just presume it was no DQ, even though it's impossible to tell with this company. And honestly, the table bump wasn't even the most insulting part of the match. I'll tell you what rubbed me the wrong way. Are we all just supposed to neglect the spot where Vikingo gave Omega the top rope Rana and spiked the guy right on the back of his previously repaired neck? Wasn't this guy out for well over a year getting surgery done to basically repair all of the damage done to his body for doing stupid, reckless shit throughout his career? You know, kind of the same stupid, reckless shit he was doing in this match with some guy from Mexico nobody's ever heard of? For a complete throwaway match on Dynamite that nobody's going to remember 6 weeks from now? Yeah, sounds grand. Let's further toy with the possibility of restoring all that damage by taking a bump right on the back of the neck that I previously just had operated on. Fucking idiot. Meanwhile, they're hitting every big move in the book, kicking out of everything like it's the main event of WrestleMania. This guy that nobody's ever heard of before except for the 30-something people that watch AAA, kicking out of every big move that Omega's putting on this guy. Keep in mind, one of AEW's alleged top performers, just throwing everything he can at this guy and can't beat him. The only thing that would keep him down at this point is a shotgun. It's beyond insulting. And finally, after doing everything but running over each other with goddamn buses, the finish is Omega moving out of the way of a 630 splash attempt, and he hits Vikingo with a one-winged angel for the 3. And of course, because this was a dream match, you see, well, they couldn't end the show with having Omega embrace the guy or try to put over this Hijo del Vikingo guy as someone special, because that's what we were told going into the show. This guy's truly unique. He's a can't-miss entity. You guys aren't going to want to miss this match. No. Because you see, they had to have an afterbirth. Yeah. An afterbirth that was so important, Not only did it completely overshadow and kill all of the momentum of the match that everybody was just creaming their pants for, but the angle itself was so horrendous in every sense of the word. Now that I think about it, I almost would have just preferred they had Vikingo and Omega go an extra 4 minutes just to stall for time. So let me attempt to break this down. Okay, so Omega wins. Hijo just vanishes. Never hear from him again. He may as well have been sucked into the ether. Also, the BCC could then run out and start gang attacking Omega while he was trying to do an interview with Tony Schiavone. Because, of course, that's the way it always goes when Tony tries to interview people on this show. No wonder everybody sucks at promos. It's because no one ever gets a chance to fucking talk. So the BCC's doing a fake-looking gang beatdown, and I got so wrapped up in all the drama over the dream match debate with Omega and Vikingo, I didn't even mention the story they attempted to sell on the program this week. So right as the show began, they immediately cut to a shot in the parking lot where the Beta Bucks were getting loaded into an ambulance and carted off to a local medical facility. No idea what happened to them. We never found out. I guess we were led to believe they were jumped by the BCC. And apparently they did such a number on them, they both sold it like they fell off the jungle gym at recess, just sitting on the gurneys with no blood, no bandages, no bruises, just laying there pretending to be hurt. Because obviously you wouldn't expect the Bucks to know what real pain looks like. It's not like they ever sell to begin with. In any case, during that opening minute of the show that they just glossed right over and moved on from, Hangman Adam Page was also there, and he jumped into the back of one of the ambulances and rode off, so he was gone for most of the show. Meanwhile, Omega was pitching a fit about it in the locker room, trying to express concern over the fact that his boys were taken out. Expressing. In only a way that Kenny Omega knows how to do. So, fake, in other words. So then we fast forward to the post-match angle. The Bucks were carted off. Adam Page went with them, so he was gone from the arena for most of the program. And yet, somehow in this melee at the end of the show, while the Blackpool Dorks are beating down Omega, somehow, some way, in the magical world of professional wrestling, they were able to time this in such a manner to where Page conveniently makes it back to the building in the nick of time to make the triumphant save. Keep in mind, Page was in such a hurry to make a beeline for the arena that they had a cameraman out in the parking lot filming this slow, dramatic arrival in the ambulance, driving at approximately 3 miles per hour through the parking lot with flashers and sirens going off. Because, it's not like his friend was getting his ass kicked in the ring or anything. Got to make sure you have that big, dramatic, grand entrance. So here comes Page storming out of the driver's seat. Because, WWF did that angle 20-something years ago on Raw when Steve Austin was white hot. So AEW figured, now would be a good time to replicate that in 2023. With Adam Page, no less. Who was nowhere near as cool as Steve Austin was. Nor will he ever be. By the way, this is all made twice as great. Because while the heels are ghetto stomping Omega into oblivion, they see the ambulance show up on the big screen. Adam Page is at least 120 yards away from the fucking ring by this point. At least the standard length of a regular football field. That's how much distance there was between Adam Page and this fucking ring. So what did the heels do? Well, they just stopped beating on Omega. You see, because they all figured, oh, look at that. An ambulance slowly making its way toward the building. Let's all stop to admire this for a minute. And then we'll go back to stomping a mudhole in Omega. So, of course, Page finally makes his way down to the ring about a year too late for the big save. They still had to play his theme music, too, which was just hilariously awesome. Typical WWE fashion there as well. And after Paige clears the ring, they finally end the show with basically setting in motion that the big feud is going to be the Elite versus the Blackpool Combat Cucks. Yippee. Even though the feud is still technically 4-on-3 right now, advantage baby phases, because Danielson is still MIA, contemplating his life right now. Meanwhile, I'm pretty sure they'll end up having to find a way to reinsert him into this down the road, which is going to suck a hard cock. And that's pretty much how they ended the show. And look, here's the last thing I'm going to say about this before we move on with the rest of the program. Removing all my attempts at comedy here. I mean, I got to find a way to entertain myself when I review this show somehow because it's so fucking bad. Okay, let's analyze the data. Since we kind of live in that sports-based analysis of what All Elite Wrestling is supposed to be. Did the show do a good rating? With them hot-shotting a big match that all the indie nerds could fap off to? Sure. But as I've said many times whenever AEW does a good number, how do they sustain it? That's going to be the important thing to evaluate in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Remember when Dynamite did that 1 million overall viewer number like 4 weeks ago? The show where Tony false advertised a big announcement and didn't deliver? What happened the following week? That's exactly right. They fell right back to the number they'd been averaging for like the last 3 or 4 months. So really, I know people are going to get all excited that they did whatever it was, 954,000 overall viewers. Okay. That's still significantly down from the numbers they were doing when Punk was around a little over a year ago. Just saying. But what happens if that number plummets again? What's everybody going to have to say for it then? Are we ever going to see Hijo del Vikingo again? Highly doubt it. He'll probably fall off the map and we'll never see him again. And then Omega will go back to jerking himself off in 6-man tag matches that nobody wants to see. So that's something I want everybody to keep in mind. Yeah, they did a moderately decent number for a change. Okay? What about next week? And the week after that? And the week after that? And the week after that? And so on. Just some food for thought. As for the rest of the show, well, allow for me to run down the remainder of my notes. Spoiler alert, it's not a lot. Yet again, they open with the company mascot because Tony Khan continues to insist on this bullshit notion that this guy's a ratings draw, despite every evidence to the contrary. And they went through a series of like 3 or 4 weeks where this idiot came out right from the onset to stink up the joint with his bad outlaw routine. Every single time, they were well under their usual starting average of going in at 1 million viewers. Because people have seen the act, it's stale, it's old, it's stupid, and nobody wants to see it anymore. Now that Tony realizes his jagoffs run people off from the beginning, because he still has a hard-on for this clown, he's obviously still going to book him on the show every God-blessed week. But you see, now he thinks that he's being clever by throwing Sting in there. An actual star with actual drawing ability. And I know the excuse is going to be, see, Orange Cassidy did good numbers for AEW's opening segment this week. To which I'll then argue it by saying, no, Sting did the good number for AEW's opening segment, you fucking idiots. Orange Cassidy was there riding his coattails. And if you don't like me saying that, you can go piss up a rope, because you know it's fact. For the record, if you care, the match was the mascot, Darby Allin and Sting, wrestling Kip Sabian, the Butcher, and the Blade. Kip Sabian, a guy that is still somehow mysteriously milking a paycheck out of Tony after 3 years of being the most useless act on the entire roster, and the Butcher and the Blade that have been wasted potential since day one. Their novelty wore off the moment they lost and got wedged into the background like everybody else. They've been a complete non-entity since. So obviously I didn't watch this. Why would I need to? When was the last time Sting even appeared on the show? We haven't seen him in months. Here he is, just randomly showing up out of nowhere to work a meaningless six-man tag at the start of the program that did absolutely nothing for anybody involved. And I like Sting. But who cares? Really. That was followed with the Ass Boys beating Top Flight in a tag team championship match. Again, just a totally random throwaway title match in the middle of the show that meant absolutely nothing. Already on top of the fact that AEW barely has any credible top tag teams to begin with. The only remotely compelling title program they can even do at this point is the Guns and FTR. And as I've discussed before, I never bought Austin and Colton as main event tag team players to begin with. I never would have put the belts on them, but that's a conversation we had 4 or 5 weeks ago? When Tony put the belts on the Guns and we were all sitting here wondering, why the hell did they have the Acclaim drop the straps when the title switch was really uncalled for? Well, turns out we're all still waiting to hear an answer for that. The match was sloppy, all over the place, not good at all. 4 green guys with not enough tag team experience going out there and working an indie-style match that is not suited for television. And again, is it their fault? No, of course it's not. But it's the reality of where we are in this mess of a current tag division that AEW's created for itself. They just had to introduce a set of trios titles. They just had to do the trios division so the Beta Bucks and Omega could go play with all their friends. And it basically left the regular tag division in shambles. And now here we are in 2023. This is what we're left with. These are the best options they have to work with. And even when we analyze it from the standpoint of, well, based on the afterbirth here, isn't it kind of obvious this is setting up FTR to recapture the belts again? Okay. And then what? Who are they going to feud with? Top Flight? You mean the guys that you just beat here flat like they were nothing? Bennett and Taven? You mean the 2 guys that showed up in a battle royal a few weeks ago and haven't done anything remotely interesting on the regular TV show since? 2 guys that were involved in this segment for all of 8 seconds before they disappeared and were never seen again? I mean, I guess the only other option at this point is the Acclaimed, if you really think about it. But then you're going to go right back to the problem of splitting the audience, because now the people have to pick and choose who they want to cheer for, and that really doesn't benefit either team. Who else is there? You really think the Beta Bucks are going to willingly do the job for FTR? Now? When it would mean absolutely nothing? Because the time for them to do that rubber match already came and went? And now people don't care about it because the feud hasn't been hot in almost a year? Actually, now that you think about it, yeah, it does seem like the optimal time for the Bucks to decide, hey, maybe we should do that job for FTR now. Now that the feud is colder than a witch's tit, no one could possibly give a fuck about the outcome. Yeah, I could see them doing it. I could also see them beating FTR to win the AEW tag belts back, now that they dropped the other sets of play toys. But who even knows at this stage? Again, the whole thing's a fucking disaster. Speaking of disasters, did y'all catch this no disqualification match with Stokely Hathaway and Hook? Holy smokes. This is bad. All right, first of all, let's get the obvious out of the way. Why no DQ? Well, did I not just say last week, plain as the day is long, I said the day Tony Khan goes 1 week without booking some kind of hardcore no DQ plunder fuckfest stipulation, it'll be the day I truly start questioning his overall well-being. Sure enough, 1 week later, glad to know Tony's still sane. He's still running the gauntlet with weekly no DQ, anything goes type stipulation matches. Because you know everything's still functioning all right upstairs. It really is the modern day Nitro. Random hardcore matches in the middle of the program for Christ knows what reason. And they all suck. I mean, yeah, it was short. But like, can anybody rationally explain why, again, in the middle of a random episode of Dynamite, they just decided, let's have a babyface versus heel manager match? For no reason, with absolutely no build-up. Because you all remember the time on the Saturday Night Superstation in 1987 where they just randomly decided to blow off the Ronnie Garvin-Jim Cornette match on free television with no build, right? Yeah, you all remember how they just gave that away in the middle of the show, right? Oh, what's that? They didn't? Oh, that's right. Yeah. Because unlike Tony, Dusty actually knew what the fuck he was doing. Jiminy cricket. Christ. It's enough to make your head boil. Do I even need to bother critiquing the match? The fake retirement speech Stokely gave 30 seconds before they rang the opening bell? Just so Justin Roberts can make fun of him for handing him a receipt for Wingstop? What a payoff. Or how about them completely neutering the fire extinguisher spot? Because apparently nobody has clued Mr. Mark Booker of the Year that it's supposed to be the baby face that uses the gimmick on the heel, not the other way around. Do I really have to explain that? Do I also need to go there with Hook completely missing like 8 or 9 chair shots in a row to Stokely's back before putting him away with the submission? After he already threw Stokely onto a gimmick guardrail and killed him? Y'all remember when Hook was a serious talent that we all kind of bought the mystique of? And then Tony decided to pair him with Danhausen and it killed Hook's momentum? Because Tony's a fucking idiot? Yeah. Good times. Good times. So that was a piece of shit segment. Then it was followed with a relatively shit announcement. After several weeks of waiting to hear who Adam Cole's opponent was going to be for his return next week, well, we found out on this show. We've been waiting with bated breath. Y'all ready to hear who it is? Give me a dramatic drum roll for the build. It's Daniel Garcia. Amen. Don't shoot the messenger. I just work here, brother. Yeah, remember when Adam Cole came back and did that promo like a month and a half ago? And I was like, for the love of God, please keep this guy as far away from Chris Jericho as humanly possible. Well, he hasn't quite walked through the front door yet, but he's certainly lurking the property. Daniel Garcia is just one step away. And while I know Jericho's preoccupied with whatever he's doing in the 6-man tag division right now, trust me, if Cole's traction stays relatively high with the fans, if he stays popular and he stays over as a babyface, you know Jericho is going to be the first to ride that gravy train of momentum. he'll be the first to cut Adam's balls out from under him. Wouldn't be the first time it's happened to poor Adam Cole in AEW. Probably won't be the last. Now, as far as the actual return match, what do I have to say about it? Well, I'm not too pleased that his first opponent's going to be Daniel fucking Garcia, the guy that gives drywall personality. I mean, Tony had plenty of time to simmer on this and try to actually come up with a relatively big return match for Cole. He's had well over a month. And you're telling me the best they could come up with was Daniel fucking Garcia? I mean, I'm sure the match will be fine. I'm still kind of anxious to see what Adam Cole looks like without a shirt on. If he shows up in good shape and looks like he's been at least doing a few bicep curls in his spare time, I'll be moderately happy. I know he's been through some tough challenges in the last year, but the guy said he's been recovering well. So great for him. Glad he's getting healthy. But at the same time, I don't want to see him show up next week and look like he did before all the concussion stuff went down. When he went out there every week and looked like he'd been floating in the river for 3 days. If he shows up with good body definition, some form of muscular tone, great. I just want to see him look like an athlete. But if he comes back and looks smaller than Britt Baker, I'll probably have to reevaluate my analysis. Tell you what I won't have to reevaluate anything on is my review of Jon Moxley versus Stu Grayson. And that's basically because I don't have a review for it, because I didn't watch it. Fuck Jon Moxley, fuck the job order and everything about those goons. And fuck Tony Khan for continuing to give Moxley a platform to make a mockery of the wrestling business with his garbage matches. God, that guy's terrible. Wrestler of the Year, people. The same people that voted Tony Khan Booker of the Year. But are you really shocked? Are you really? I also don't have anything to say about this women's segment, except for one question. We talk about Tony Khan's never-ending infatuation with cramming the company mascot in the show every week. Am I going blind? Or is Tony Khan doing the exact same thing with Sky Blue? Is this not like the 7th or 8th week in a row this chick's been booked to wrestle on the show? Is something going on behind the scenes with Tony and Sky Blue that we should be aware of? Is there an NDA or something we're not being clued into yet? Does Sky Blue secretly have insider knowledge on Tony Khan's checkered past? Possibly holding him up for money? Because I can't think of any other reason they'd be booking Sky Blue to work another TV match. I guess the other possibility could be, oh, they ran out of enhancement talents because everybody else is either injured or too rotten at their jobs to work a believable match. Either is possible. And then, of course, there's everything that went down in the main event, which we spent about 40 minutes ranting about at the top of the report. And look, was the show better than normal? Perhaps. It was good seeing FTR get a showcase again. Adam Cole, jury's still out on his ring return, but you know, I am somewhat looking forward to seeing him get back in there again. You know, he is a guy that I've been a fan of for a long time. I know he's not everybody's cup of tea, but he was one of my favorite dudes to watch in NXT once upon a time. He felt like a big player in that company. AEW is a whole different case entirely, but maybe this is the resurrection period of Adam Cole. Their chance at second redemption with the guy to actually do it right this time. Do I have faith in it? No, of course not, because of the guy booking the show. But am I at least willing to hold out hope to see whether or not they drop the ball with him again? Sure, why the hell not? I got nothing else to latch onto watching the show every week. And again, like I talked about, no MJF, which was very noticeable. But at the same time, I'll compliment them where it's due. They seem to dial back a little bit on the stupidity for a change. Yeah, we still got the company mascot rammed up our gopher holes, but he was at least kept to a bare minimum. He was just sort of a bit player in a match with other dudes this week. And again, if the main event is your flavor of wrestling, then good on you. You'll probably be sitting here talking about how it's a match of the year candidate later on. Me, on the other hand, I've seen the video game style match 1,000 times over. It's not for me. It never has been. But again, that's why I sort of keep my wrestling fandom under the radar in a lot of cases. Because if I showed normal people what the business has become in 2023, they'd be mocking me for even acknowledging its existence. All right, so shifting gears now. Move on to the retro part of the Friday show today. And the fight is on, baby. The fight is on. We thought it wouldn't come to this. But after the ongoing dissension with Ole Anderson and the rest of the Horsemen, not only have JJ and Tully gotten physical with Ole, now we can throw Arn into the mix. Now we heard that Arn washed his hands of Ole altogether. He wanted nothing to do with him anymore. Said he's done with trying to pursue tag team gold with Ole as his partner. So as of the most recent NWA Pro Edition, Arn and Ole finally came to blows, with JJ assisting Arn in whatever he was attempting to do by hoisting Ole over his head for Arn to give him the gourd buster. Considering how Horseman heavy last week's show was, this was their chance to tie up some of the loose ends as we get closer to the 87 Crockett Cup. As usual, though, that cold open was a brief teaser for later on in the program. We would get the full context as to what went down there. But taking things over to the interview booth, we had Barry Windham out for a promo, sporting his Hard Rock Cafe sweater, which unfortunately I've never been to. Despite all the traveling I did in New York when I was an undergrad. You know, we were stationed in the middle of downtown New York for our band tour, and I never made plans to visit the Hard Rock Cafe at any point. Maybe my biggest regret of all the sights that I did see while I was there. Had the perfect opportunity when I was right in the middle of Times Square, but for whatever reason, it was never on my radar. Not that I ever had plans to go back to New York anytime soon. Fuck that place. But if there was ever a time it was going to happen, it would have been during my college years. By the way, all of this was much more interesting than Barry's promo. He just promised Ric Flair that he was hot on his tail in pursuit of the World Championship. Then we get to the ring for our opening bout on the card. I repeat, opening bout. It's Ivan Koloff and Vladimir Pietrov taking on Alan Martin and Larry Clark. You want to talk about getting off to a rocky start? Book Vladimir Pietrov in your curtain jerker spot. And that'll get you off on bad footing real quick. And to make matters even more infuriating here, they actually had the balls, the temerity, to try and inflict the Freebirds role with Ivan and Vladimir coming out with the U.S. tag belts. Even though on last week's program, it was Ivan and Dick Murdoch who won the straps. Now we are being told that the Russians are imposing their six-man tag rule where it doesn't matter who represents their team as the champions. To which I said, well, when one of those guys representing your team as a supposed champion is Vladimir Pietrov, I take grave offense to that. Pietrov was absolutely horrible here. And the worst part is he didn't even do a whole lot. But the shit he did do, visibly appalling. The thing he does where he'll have a guy in a standing front face lock and then he'll just jerk the guy up and down for a minute. I don't even know what you call that. Aside from being lost in the weeds and having no idea what you're doing out in the ring. Thankfully, Ivan did most of the work. Vladimir killed the one guy with the sickle at the end for the pinfall. At which point we went back to the booth for the Garvin brothers. They had a quick little promo segment here. Ronnie started off by mentioning that he's looking forward to meeting Jim Cornette in the cage. He's also looking forward to winning the 87 Memorial Crockett Cup with his brother. Kayfabe. Because if it turns out that the Garvins meet the Midnight Express in one of the rounds, it'll be that much sweeter revenge for them to cost the Midnights the $1 million and the trophy. And, now, in addition to bumbling over himself a few times and losing his train of thought, he abruptly turns things over to Jimmy Garvin, which I think kind of caught Jimmy off guard. I will say, though, Ronnie covered a decent bit of ground here. He never mentioned a single thing about him losing the U.S. tag titles last week. Maybe this was taped before the title switch happened, or I don't know, maybe Ronnie just forgot to bring it up, but it was very odd. Like, they literally just lost the belts last week, due in large part to getting fucked over by Eaton and Cornette. Ron Garvin had nothing to say about it here. Never mentioned the belts one time. And then, poor gorgeous Jimmy, desperately trying to come up with anything to talk about here. First, he loudly and boisterously talked about how excited he is. And he was, in fact, loud and quite boisterous. Second, he started going over all the reasons he's excited, most of which consisted of him being good-looking and having the best squeeze in the business. I thought to myself by this point, this is the pure definition of a promo segment where the boys are sent out there to talk and literally just try to come up with shit off the top of their head to say. Somehow Jimmy was able to bring it home by talking about how excited he was to see Ronnie beat up Cornette in the cage. And then he began contemplating what he was going to buy Precious with his half of the money once he and Ronnie win the Crockett Cup. And I think the conclusion he came to was, there's nothing left to buy because Precious has everything a woman could hope and dream about. And then he shook Ronnie's hand, and they left. Did you get anything out of that promo? Because I'm honestly just reporting on what I heard. They literally said nothing. And then, as God is my witness, speaking of not getting anything out of someone's promo material, after we had a Barry Windham promo in the open of the show, where he basically said nothing, followed by a Garvin Brothers promo, where they both literally said nothing, who should they bring out to the booth next? But fucking Paul Jones and the Raging Bull. I nearly screamed. You want to talk about the walking embodiment of a guy that never has anything remotely constructive to say when they give him interview time? They put Paul Jones out there after 2 back-to-back nothing-happening interview segments, and shocker here, bet you weren't prepared for this. Yeah, him and Bull, they literally said nothing. He essentially took about an hour to say the following. Raging Bull and Rick Rude are going to win the 1987 Memorial Crockett Cup. There was something here about a meat-covered dog bone. No idea what the fuck he was talking about. Bull somewhat saved it by putting over why he and Rude are the best tag team in the world today. And not only do they have the belts to prove it, but they also were awarded the #1 seed in the Crockett Cup. He also had a head-tilting comment here where he mentioned something about when you jump aboard the bowl, it is a long, hard ride. Aren't dick jokes funny? They really do write themselves, though. He also continues to refer to the R&R connection as the awesome twosome. Makes me wonder why they didn't just refer to Rude and Bull's team as such. Why they kept trying to steal Ricky and Robert's R&R connection. I mean, I get they were feuding, but awesome twosome has a much better ring to it. Didn't matter at the end of the day, I guess, but it is a catchy ring name. Then we went back to the ring for Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin versus Kent Glover. I guess now we can start calling him Happy Jimmy Garvin. Not only did he hammer down earlier that he was very happy to be on the show, but David Crockett made sure to reaffirm that while calling the action here. Happy Jimmy Garvin. Would have been the perfect partner for Happy Corbin once upon a time. And Gorgeous Jimmy wasn't the only person happy in this segment. The studio fans were overjoyed to see this man wrestle this week. Beyond elated. Keep in mind, on this show, approximately, a month and a half ago, this man was a heel. A hated heel at that. Not even like the Horseman level heel where the fans cheer them because they're so awesome. No, the fans were pretty vociferous when it came to booing poor old Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. But not anymore. He is a full-fledged babyface. They cheered everything he did, up to and including one of the worst brainbusters I've ever seen him do. But these people did not give two flying fucks. They just wanted to see Happy Garvin strut his stuff. And that he did. So by this point, I wrote down, this is the worst episode of Crockett TV I've seen in the entirety of 87. Absolutely nothing of substance has happened up to this point. And holy mackerel, wouldn't you know it? Right as I jot that down in my notes, who should be out at the booth next but J.J. Dillon, here to spice things up a little bit with the program, and not a moment too soon. Lo and behold, it's more story follow-up from everything that transpired with the Horsemen in the last few weeks. First, JJ talks about how Tony and David continue to assert that the Four Horsemen are undergoing a series of problems, when the fact of the matter is the Horsemen are riding on cloud nine as we speak. The only one problem with the group was Ole Anderson, who continues to be a thorn in everybody's side. But as far as JJ is concerned, he doesn't really care how Ole chooses to deal with the problem, because what's done is done. The rest of the group have moved on, and on to bigger and better things. Talks about how Ole keeps trying to wield himself into one last fight, but all he's done is expose himself and continue to get in dire situations that he can't fight out of. Not the least of which was the video footage they aired at the beginning of the program. That being the Ole and Arn street fight that took place following Ole's televised match. And of course, while Ole and Arn are tussling on the mat, there's slimeball J.J. Dillon giving Ole those weak-ass looking punts to the rib, which I totally neglected to touch on earlier, but that was funny. Even better, too, during the angle, they show the footage of Arn and JJ walking off through the aisleway while the refs are attending to Ole. Meanwhile, in the studio, JJ is covering the feed and sharing his input on everything. And while he's running down Ole and declaring that this is the exact reason why the Horsemen washed their hands of him, of course, he has to get in his jabs about getting physically involved by helping out Arn, saying that he had to get involved because it was personal. And if there's one thing we know about J.J. Dillon, he never gets involved in business that does not directly pertain to him. The man has never cheated in a wrestling match in his entire life. I just thought, what a dick. But speaking of dicks, the footage did not end there, because Ole ended up making a beeline for the locker room after the fact, while JJ's putting over his stubborn attitude of Ole refusing to leave well enough alone. Here comes Ole storming into the Horseman locker room. And who should be the first guy that he confronts but Ric Flair? He shoves JJ to the wayside and tells Flair that he wants an answer. Where does he stand? And while Flair gets up and tells Ole that he's lost the fire and doesn't have it anymore, here comes the band of goons to jump attack Ole from behind. They're ghetto stomping the fuck out of him. Ole's busted open at the forehead. The gang beatdown proves too much for Ole to handle. And it ends with the Horsemen throwing Ole, literally throwing him out of the locker room into the room across the hall. And Ole's down groaning and selling in a broken heap. And in JJ's closing statement, he goes, "They may have turned the light on to expose Ole's broken body to the rest of the world, but I have officially turned the light out on Ole Anderson." Then coming back from break, we had Ric Flair out to speak on behalf of the situation. His roots go way back with Ole, since the time he started his wrestling career. From the time he was 16 years old, and Ole pulled Ric Flair aside and told him, "Hey kid, if you want to be a man, be a professional wrestler. And if you want to be a professional wrestler, link up with the Andersons." Never mattered what occupation you held. If you crapped on the sport of pro wrestling, Ole would be right there to grab you by the scruff of the neck, throw you into the ring, and tell you to show him what you got. Ole was the man. And when the original Horsemen were founded, they made sure to prioritize business over everything else. Money, fame, fortune. That's what the Horsemen Foundation was built on. Notoriety, prestige, proving that they're the best in the world. All the Horsemen vow to prove that they're the best by coming out every week and showing it on the program, not sitting at home wiping snot off their kids and rubbing their asses with baby wipes. Flair remembers the time Ole used to push and shove him around, but from now on, it's going to be Luger, Tully, Arn, Flair, and JJ that are doing the shoving and pushing. And if Ole's stupid enough to try and deprive Flair of the one thing that means the most to him in life, the World's Heavyweight Championship. To put it in layman's terms, they were essentially vowing to slit Ole's throat. It did escalate rather quickly by the end there. But again, just to reflect on all this, it's amazing to think things can really change on a dime in wrestling. For the first 20 minutes of this program, it was the most boring, dreary, monotonous, nothing happening wrestling program I've seen in the entirety of '87. And then as soon as you get the Horsemen on the show, like fucking clockwork, man, they instantly turn everything around in a hurry. Flair's out there doing the best goddamn promo of his entire life. The footage of Ole getting beaten down and emasculated by the group. One of the most sympathetic situations they've ever put Ole in. It was all impeccably done. There was so much of this storyline that I completely forgot about. But seeing all this pan out years later, reliving the footage again, goddamn, this is awesome. Everyone was so great in this. You just can't say enough good things about the Horsemen split in '87. And by that, I mean reshuffling of the teammates. Then I got to watch Arn Anderson and Lex Luger beat the ever-loving tar out of Tommy Angel and Larry Stevens. I'm like, this is great! Which is equally as awesome as the promo. One of my favorite versions of Luger to watch was the fired-up, pissed-off Lex Luger. Super intense, mad Luger. He was great here. Arn going in there and trying to pry out the job guys' teeth, ripping at their jaws, clawing at their eyeballs, slamming the shit out of them with power moves. Man, I thought the Tully Luger pairing was a great pairing a few weeks ago. I think I might like the Arn Luger pairing even more. Luger ended up going over with the rack. And my notes conclude with, hard to imagine the fans would ever want to cheer these guys for beating ass. It's a mind-boggling concept. And then following everything we just saw in the last 10 minutes, what was easily the highlight of the entire show, we come back from break for a Brad Armstrong-Paul Garner match. Brad won with the leg sweep takeover. And then we're immediately back to the booth for more Horsemen follow-up. Honestly, they should have just made this in the entire show, looking back. Tully's out there with JJ running down Ole and taking some great pot shots at him. Standing there talking about how Ole was trying to be such a great role model for his punk kid. But the lasting image he sees of his father is Ole laying down on the ground in a pool of his own blood, groaning. Talks about how the Horsemen are alive, they're better than ever, and it's in Ole's best interest to stay at home and keep his nose out of their business, because they're dangerous and they're right back on the top of the mountain. Ole wasn't in the gym training, he wasn't working overtime, and even with him having the gall to call Tully the outsider of the group, when he's sitting at the dinner table alone, looking across at his family with no mouths to feed, he can think and reflect back on what he said about referring to Tully as an outsider, because now the roles are reversed. It's one of those deals, again, I sit here and I listen to Tully speak. Not just Tully, but all the Horsemen. Everyone's taking shots at poor Ole, running him down, doing everything they can possibly do to demean this guy's image, diminish the man, make him look like the most sympathetic babyface of all time. And while I know it's a work, I just can't help but sit here and think the entire time, God, these guys are such assholes. They're totally believable. I can buy every single word they're saying to me, even if I know deep down how close of friends these guys were all back in the day. And, you know, that's all easier to see more closely now that I've been smart enough to the business, but boy howdy, you watch classic moments like this, man, and you still get those occasional moments where you can get yourself emotionally invested in something. You can suspend all disbelief. It doesn't happen often, especially by today's standards. But man, when they do, it makes me reflect on why I'm still a fan of this sport after all these years. And yeah, whatever. Call me a mark for still referring to it as a sport. Fuck you. You know, you're probably one of the same soy boys that tries to run with the idea that wrestling is supposed to be artistic expression. So, piss off. Let me have my moment. It's still real to me, damn it. But getting back to the show, we had a quick Jim Crockett announcement regarding one of the upcoming house shows in Baltimore that Friday night. He said that in addition to the preliminary 16 teams being in action, all of whom are going to be partaking in the Crockett Cup tournament on the 10th and 11th of April, we're also going to get Ole Anderson versus Big Bubba in a cage match, which I already kind of forgot that was another part of last week's story. That one sort of fell into obscurity. The fact that JJ paid Cornette and Bubba to take out Ole, a plan that utterly failed in the end, but not for lack of effort on their part. I'm sure Bubba soaked up that match like a wet sponge, learning how Ole helped to lay that match out. I mean, that's not too far removed from Bubba working the cage match with Dusty in Pittsburgh. Man, no wonder Bubba caught on to the business so quickly. Look at the guys he worked with, because he was still green by this point in his career. What a natural that guy was, though. He definitely got it more quickly than Tim Horner did. Granted, they weren't having Horner work with top guys like Ole or Dusty at any point. So, in all fairness, he didn't have a lot of opportunities to get experience working with the main eventers. But he did wrestle El LeBeau. That he did indeed. It was fine. I think this was the part in the show where I really started to notice how squeaky the ring was. It was relatively noticeable in the opening match, but my God, by the time they rang the bell for this, it was starting to get beyond annoying. We had more chants of "Let's go TM," 2 syllables. Maybe it's a Southern thing. Who knows? Both guys did some awkward-looking reversals at the end. Horner went over with the bridging suplex. Then he desperately tried to power his way through a promo afterwards, completely blown up and gasping for air. He covered about 70 topics here, all of which he transitioned to by letting out a heavy wheeze in between. Something about him and Mike Rotunda gunning for the Crockett Cup. Something about Ole Anderson. Something about Dick Murdoch going turncoat and siding with the Russians. Something about Ron Garvin getting his hands on the Midnight Express. Something about how the Four Horsemen like to go out and party and fuck girls, but it's hard to wrestle 6 times a week and have enough time to live the party lifestyle. And, I have to give the guy credit for being able to get all this out, despite being totally winded by the end of it. Probably would have been a million times better if they would have done this promo before the match, so I didn't have to hear him constantly pant into the microphone. It was only slightly more comprehensible than Nikita Koloff's promo after the break. He also rattled off about 80 different topics in about 2 minutes. In addition to covering the Crockett Cup, he also talked about defending the U.S. heavyweight title against Luger and Arn. And then he promised Ric Flair that he has not forgotten about him and the World Heavyweight title. He vowed to be world champion one day. Meanwhile, Flair would be nothing more than a distant memory. Wrong on both accounts. And at this point in the program, I was in dire need of a pit stop. I had this playing on the TV, and because I was too lazy to hit the pause function, I was basically like, maybe there'll be a match that I can miss and not feel guilty about. Conveniently enough, who should be up next but Wahoo McDaniel versus Randy Barber. And immediately I said, divine intervention stepping in to save my bladder. Now's a good time to go do the deed. I left the room for about 3 minutes. When I came back, Wahoo had his foot pressed on Barber's face while he had him in an arm wrench. I thought, did they do anything for the previous 3 minutes that I missed? Judging by the crowd reaction, where all the people were chanting, hit him, and get him Wahoo, they were basically imploring for him to do anything but stand there clenching on this guy's arm. Finally, he won with the chop off the ropes. I watched 20 seconds of this match. I think I yawned 4 times. Thankfully, we came back so I could see Ronnie Garvin beat the shit out of Dexter Westcott. And I think David Crockett had the line of the century in watching Garvin take this clown to school. They had Gorgeous Jimmy out there at the interview booth during this. So David goes, Jimmy, he's killing this guy. And if you can just envision a giddy, overly excited David Crockett putting over the fact that Ron Garvin is out there mutilating a poor fucker in the ring, it makes it that much funnier. We had all the usual Garvin offense, including him yanking the poor guy up by his trunks, giving him a wedgie in the process, which was just great. Slapping the crap out of him, stretching him on the mat, turning his legs over his head, which were also tied behind his arms, which were also wrapped over his nose, which was also bent over his ass cheeks. Literally the embodiment of a human pretzel. And while Westcott's begging and pleading for his life, Ronnie just looks like a man possessed out there. He eventually hit him with the back body drop and then put him away with the knockout punch. And then came the other great moment on the show this week. A moment that I'm actually curious if Jim Cornette has any recollection of. Not only mocking and impersonating Jimmy Garvin on television with the wig, the outfit, and all the mannerisms, but doing a really good impersonation. It was actually kind of scary how accurate it was. Like, he even grabbed at his hair and started bopping his head up and down like Gorgeous Jimmy would do. You could tell he watched the tapes. And while he's out there acting like a Nimrod, there's Bobby Eaton standing there next to him trying to keep a straight face the whole time. Corny cracking jokes about his main squeeze. So Bobby Eaton pulls out a poster of a giant fat woman in a bikini. And after he takes shots at Garvin's "not my fault" catchphrase, off come the wig, off come the shades, and we get super stern, super serious Jim Cornette for a minute. He says that what will be their fault is everything the Midnights do to the Garvin brothers. They're going to finish the job they started with Ronnie, they're going to rid him from the wrestling business, and then they're going to turn around and do the same thing to Jimmy and Precious. He did have a line in here where he said that the Midnights were successful in keeping Ronnie off of television for a long time after burning his face with a fireball. Not long enough, but a decent length of time. To which I said, a long time? Wasn't he back on TV in like 2 weeks? No, in any case. The other thing I did not mention about this promo, no Dennis Condrey. Not only was he MIA, he wasn't even mentioned. They just glossed right over it. And in fact, it carried over to the next segment, because not only was Cornette out there to do his brief rambling heat promo, followed by his introduction for the Midnights, but it wasn't a tag match. It was for a Beautiful Bobby singles match, wherein his lead up to introducing Bobby was by admonishing the fans for thinking the Midnights were incapable of working singles matches, even though I'm pretty sure we've seen Bobby work a handful of singles matches on television already. Once again, though, no mention whatsoever of Dennis Condrey's name. Eaton went out there to wrestle Alan Fox. Alan Fox, who, well, he had the bleach blonde hairdo going for him. That's about where the compliments cease to exist. But Corny's justification for this match, even though they're only a couple weeks out from the Crockett Cup by this point, people are also asking the question of why he would be sending out his boys to work singles matches when they are so close to a tournament involving tag teams. And his rationalization was, because we can. Word. Even though I think most people are kind of aware of the story of Dennis's departure from Crockett Promotions in '87, it was abrupt, it was untimely, and it basically left them scrambling last minute to find Bobby a suitable replacement right before he was about to work the Crockett Cup in Baltimore. And again, while I'm a little hairy on the details of what led up to Dennis deciding to leave Crockett Promotions with literally zero notice, even Cornette's talked about the fact that he had no idea Dennis took off and left until the day after he dropped him and Eaton off at the hotel. Never came back the next day to meet them. Now, the rumor was that he was going through a messy divorce at the time. There may have been other contributing factors that I kind of neglect to remember. Again, I can't confirm what specific detail led to him leaving, but I think by the time they shot the tape for this show, Dennis had already walked out, and they already had their minds made up or who they wanted to bring in to replace Dennis as Bobby's partner. I think there's also a promo coming up on television soon where Cornette basically rips into Dennis and throws him under the bus in one of those semi-shoot promos, which I don't think I've ever heard him cut before, so going to be interested to see that promo delivery. Again, it's well documented that they're good friends. I know Cornette has talked about the story on his podcast before. Obviously, he's going to try and babyface everything. Now that we can reflect on the story years after the fact, and we kind of know the fallout from everything that happened. Needless to say, I'm sure they were fucking pissed by this point. Even if they had a backup plan in mind, the timing of Dennis leaving right before the 87 Crockett Cup, that threw a huge monkey wrench into the works. It ended up doing wonders for Stan's career, but yeah, this is a weird transition period. These couple shows where Bobby's out there running solo matches, basically ghosting the entirety of the story right now. It's like, it's so weird. We obviously see that Dennis isn't there, so where the fuck is he? Is he sick? Is he hurt? Did he just not feel like coming out to work that night? They never talk about it. It's like the guy never existed. I think we'll get more clarity on it soon, but again, it's one of those details when you watch it back in real time, you have no idea why Dennis Condrey just vanishes altogether. He's there one week, he's gone the next, and then all of a sudden, here's Stan Lane popping up out of nowhere as Bobby's replacement partner, and everyone's like, who? And it's funny, too, because like I said, it was an immediate transition. They throw Stan into the equation. They pretty much ghost the Dennis story entirely, and they're like, all right, baby, here we go. Back to business as usual. Even in 1987, you have to wonder what the studio fans were thinking. They're probably like, what the hell's going on here? They literally got no explanation. And we still don't really know the entire context to this day. It's one of those underground stories that they've kept under the radar for a long time. Who knows if we'll ever get an answer. Anyway, did I talk about Bobby winning that match? No, he did. It was fun. Bobby Eaton's matches are always entertaining. That was followed with the Rock and Roll Express beating Zane Smith and Darren Dalton. Or Daryl Dalton. Whatever his name was. My notes for this match consist of two things. Rock and Roll Express win with double dropkick, and my God, Dalton's man tits. All in caps, by the way. I also liked at the end, as Morton was going for the pin on Dalton, Robert Gibson is standing behind him, fending off Zane Smith. In his way to ensure that Zane did not break up the pinfall attempt, Gibson points at Zane Smith, and he glares. And that was enough for Zane Smith to stand on the apron and decide, well, got me there. There's no way I'm going to be able to break up that pinfall attempt. No way Zane could fight through the force of Robert Gibson's finger point of doom. He said, you better not come in this ring, motherfucker. And he didn't. Then following that was a Lex Luger promo that I pretty much wrote nothing down about, aside from him spewing off some of the Horseman credentials and getting drowned out by the studio crowd for a lot of it. He ended up stuttering over himself and losing his train of thought midway through. The only thing I took away from it was him mentioning something about how every time he visits the major cities, all the girls are frothing at the mouth at the sight of his awesome genetics. Meanwhile, they are panning the camera to all the girls in the studio, half of which are either completely disinterested or the other half are not even paying attention. At one point, they cut to a shot of a mom sitting there bouncing her kid on her lap, totally oblivious to Luger's promo. Yeah, he was an odd fit. They really tried to make Luger not look like an outcast in the Horsemen. Every time I hear him out there talking about the Horseman lifestyle, the fine dining, the Space Mountain evenings at the hotels, blah, blah, I just think, not for a second Do I buy that Lex Luger actually participates in the party lifestyle? You look at a guy like that, no way that guy's drinking heavy liquor. Anyway, we came back for a Rock and Roll Express promo. Kind of the common theme of the show this week. They literally said nothing in their promo. Gibson mumbled something about the 1987 Crockett Cup. Ricky Morton put over the company and all the teams. Said they were coming in at 110% ready to win the $1 million. I got nothing else out of it. And then for the main event, Barry Windham wrestled Big Bill Tab. We had approximately one heckler in the crowd that was trying to give Barry a hard time here. Chance of "Go home, Barry," which I believe lasted all of about 6 seconds before the other fans put that to bed in a hurry. Beyond that, Barry hit some big power moves for a few minutes. He ended up going over with the lariat. I did enjoy watching Big Bill take 2 atomic drops and overselling the ever-loving crap out of them. And yes, I realize I just referred to him as Big Bill. Comedic timing. Meanwhile, AEW is currently trying to get over a 7-foot lumbering buffoon at the moment, who they're also referring to as Big Bill. Maybe that's what Big Bill is missing in AEW. He needs a last name to go with it. Something menacing. Preferably something better than Morrissey. Isn't that what they were calling him before the name change? How about they just go with Rogers? You had Big Bubba Rogers in Crockett Promotions. Why not just steal directly from a gimmick that actually worked for a big bodyguard type figure? Call him Big Bill Rogers. And it's not the most intimidating name on the market, but it's surely better than plain old Big Bill. That just makes me want to break out the Schoolhouse Rock tapes all over again. Yes, he's Big Bill. Yes, he's only Big Bill. And he's sitting there on Tony Khan's incredibly overinflated payroll. Yeah, I got nothing. Are we done with this show? We're ready to move on? Oh no, I forgot one more thing. We had the Horsemen back out to close things out. More so, it was Arn Anderson carrying the load here, sharing his final input with the Ole story. Talks about how he used to fear Ole growing up. Ole used to take guys that disrespected him, and he would punk them out and teach them a lesson. But when Arn and the rest of the Horsemen took down Ole in Greensboro, it made Arn realize that Ole wasn't as big and bad as he claimed to be. He's lost the fire and the passion, and while he may be tough, he doesn't have the heart to keep fighting anymore. And while Ole spent all his time trying to better his son, the Horsemen could have taken Ole's son to the promised land. They could have made him a state champion instead of a runner-up. That probably stung. He says the Horsemen never cared about public opinion, which is why they've been able to reach the success they have. Nothing is going to change. And of course, they all get their team huddled together to end the program. They are a well-oiled machine, once again. And as for poor Ole, not to be continued. Switching gears, though, let's jump over to Dallas. Since my regular transitions for these things are rotten, why bother trying to come up with something clever now? We'll just segue right into this bad boy. So this was the March 24th, 1984 episode. Kind of followed the regular pattern of the TV shows we've seen, well, since we started doing the world-class reviews. A third of it was a highlight reel. But since we're still about a month or so away from the big Texas Stadium event, the main story material was pretty substandard. The encore presentation for this week was the Jimmy Garvin Missing Link versus Chris Adams Iceman King Parsons match from, I believe, last week's episode. And I remember that match specifically because I spent the entire recap joshing about Missing Link's comical selling, even though the story was supposed to be drawn around the Adams-Garvin feud. And even on second viewing, I still couldn't get over the missing link here. What did Bill Mercer say about him in this match? He called him incomprehensible. I watched this match twice. I never caught that bit of dialogue the first time through. I also remember the whiffed super kick during the comeback that Chris Adams totally fucked up. It was like right in front of the floor cam, too. All you see is Adams run into the frame and completely butcher a super kick to Garvin. Like, not to give him a hard time, but it was so poorly mistimed. Like, Garvin couldn't even pretend to sell it without looking like an idiot. But as we talked about with last week's show, this match was Garvin's attempt to get a little bit of redemption over Adams humiliating him from the previous week's episode. And obviously I'm referring to the angle where Adams came in the ring and ripped off Garvin's robe and gloves. Turns out that revenge plan did not come to fruition because the heels lost. And again, it's an encore match, so you want to hear a more contextual breakdown, you can go listen to last week's episode. Basically, there were three things I took away from this match the second time I watched it. Missing link selling, Adams botching a super kick, and Garvin is still pissed at Adams for making him look like a jackass. I also love how they've continued to milk the Sunshine Precious fight for like 3 or 4 months now. Every time Sunshine comes within a hair's reach of getting her hands on Precious, the people all shit themselves. Usually gets a bigger pop than anything the guys do. As I've said before, though, I appreciate the replay segments. Never have anything to say about them because we talk about it in previous episode reviews, but, it's nice to get reminders on content we've already seen, instead of just presuming that everybody already knows what happened the previous week, therefore contextual analysis be damned. Right, Tony? Right? Right. So after that, we had an interview session with Mark Lorenz and Fritz Von Erich. Speaking of the Texas Stadium show we alluded to, this is kind of where Fritz set the motion for that. Now, I don't believe we ever saw this match air. If they did, shame on me for not remembering it, because it's an extraordinarily vital part of the overall world title storyline. We all remember that prior to David's death, he had been tangled up in the program with Ric Flair in the NWA World Heavyweight title. He won the match via DQ at the 83 Star Wars event, but he was still technically owed a title rematch. So at some point in January, they booked a match with Flair and Mike Von Erich, where if Mike was able to survive at least 10 minutes with Ric Flair, then David would be granted the title shot. Obviously that makes sense when you factor in the idea that Mike is still green and inexperienced. You pin him up against the NWA World Champion. Like, how in the world could Flair not be able to beat this guy in well under 10 minutes? Well, come to find out, Ric Flair is way too much of a nice guy. So, the idea there was for David to earn himself a rematch at a date to be announced. Now, we know that the NWA World Heavyweight title match will now be sanctioned for May 6th at Texas Stadium, and Flair's opponent will either be Kerry or Kevin, both of whom are currently being viewed as top contenders for the belt. And I think everybody's pretty well informed on who actually ended up getting the title shot, but it is interesting to see that even in the lead up to the show, they still had Kevin in the conversation. Because that got me thinking, technically, Kevin is owed a title rematch, too. Remember, there was that match with him and Flair in 83 that ended in the screwy DQ finish because of David's interference. So technically, you can argue that Kevin is still owed a title rematch. Actually, now that I think about it, was it Flair that Kevin wrestled? No. I think I'm mistaken there. It might have been Harley that was the champion at the time. That's right, it was Harley Race. Yeah. I remember that, because I remember talking about when David came into the ring afterwards and laid out Harley. That was the title match that never happened because he ended up dropping the belt back to Flair again. So, it doesn't really change the conversation because technically Kevin did not get a decisive victory out of that match. So technically he's still in the conversation as well. But again, we all know Kerry ends up getting the shot, subsequently winning. But I'm not going to go too deep into that conversation now for sake of revealing spoilers. As if I already didn't just spoil it. In any case, it's cool to see Kevin still getting tossed up in the conversation. But they're going to keep us updated on everything as the weeks progress. They also talked about the fans sending in donations to the Memorial Gym at the Temple Baptist Church in Louisville, Texas. And the first time I heard Fritz announce the town, I thought he was trying to enunciate Louisville, as in Louisville, Kentucky. No, it turns out there's a town in Texas called Louisville. Never heard of it. But this was a good sit down. You know, in listening to Fritz talk here, it's very apparent that he's still grieving over David. Just from the overall body language, you can tell he's really hurting right now, as are the fans. And you know, I think as we go through the world-class archives, even though the Star Wars shows are seen as some of the bigger specials they run, I think when it's all said and done, the David Memorial Show at Texas Stadium in May of '84, that might rank among one of the more important events we cover in the archives on this channel. Keep it in mind. So at this point, we went back to the Sportatorium for regularly scheduled programming. And I think this opening bout really kind of showcased more than anything kind of what's about to come down the pike in world class in the next couple of years. The lack of talent depth in the undercard. The first match is Kelly Kiniski versus Mike Reed. And one of the things you constantly hear me talk about when it comes to second or third generation wrestlers in this sport, always referencing whether or not guys had the it factor. Yeah, that Kelly Kiniski guy, he didn't have it. Call it nepotism, call it whatever you want. These Dallas fans gave Kelly Kiniski approximately 3 weeks of working underneath matches on the card to realize, yeah, this guy kind of fucking blows. And you know what the sad part is? And this is kind of, again, going to show how putrid the business has become in modern times. He actually wasn't a bad worker. He could do all the basics. He had absolutely nothing resembling a physique. Just very plain and generic in terms of a look. But he could wrestle. It's just bleh. Total flatline in terms of having any kind of charisma or presence. And it all goes back to the generational talent conversation. Sure, Gene Kiniski was great in his heyday. They tried to give his son a push, but it just didn't work. For whatever reason, the business just didn't rub off on him the same way. Not the first time. Certainly wouldn't be the last. But the match went like 2 minutes. People booed it out of the fucking building. Think about that, too. The Dallas faithful, they gave this thing a raining parade of boos. Think about how bad you have to suck when you have the Dallas crowd actively turning on your matches. That's pretty bad. Luckily, that was at least short. At which point, we went back to Buddy Roberts versus Chris Adams, which also wasn't anything remarkably special, or remarkably special, I should say. But in comparison to the Kiniski match, this was fucking Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania, especially with the way the people were reacting to it. I could have sworn we literally just reviewed this exact same match like a month ago. Wouldn't surprise me if we did. The wrestling was good here. I personally like Bill Mercer's commentary where he went back to the well with talking about the Adams-Garvin story. One of his bits of dialogue was talking about the possibility of Jimmy Garvin trying to take Chris Adams to court for stealing all of his ring gear. Just think to yourself, what if they actually shot skits of Garvin and Adams in court? Gorgeous Jimmy suing Chris Adams over stolen property. I mean, it would have been straight out of the Raw playbook, but at least those guys could have kept it entertaining. Probably just as entertaining as seeing Jimmy Garvin clean up horse shit or drag bales of hay across property. Anyway, you'll be shocked to hear Buddy lost. Again. What does that make him now? 0-177 in terms of win-loss record? I mean, at least this time they didn't job him out again. Instead, they went to the fuck finish, where Garvin attacked Adams from behind right before the match was about to finish. Adams caught Buddy with a thrust kick off the ropes, and right as he was about to go down for the pin, Garvin ran in from behind and clubbed him in the back of the head. And that spawned the 2-on-1 beatdown until Mike Von Erich ran out to even the odds. To yet another thunderous ovation for the big grand babyface save. And of all the Von Erichs, it's Mike that gets the pop. I did laugh right before they cut away, though, because they went to Mark Lorenz for the official time in the match. It apparently timed out at exactly 9 minutes and 59 seconds. And since most world-class TV matches have 10-minute time limits, I just thought, really? Why not just go to the time limit draw? Did you have to have Garvin run out there exactly 1 second before the bell would have rang? You just had to make sure Chris Adams still got the W? I thought that was funny. But all of that rounded out for the main event. The returning Super D's and the General Skandar Akbar back to wrestle the Iceman and Kerry Von Erich. On the subject of long-standing recurring feuds, am I crazy? Or have the Super D's and the Iceman been feuding for like 7 months? When did they shoot the fireball angle with Parsons? Wasn't that at like the tail end of 83? Apparently they're still going at it. I mean, I guess if I got a fireball to the face, I'd probably have more than a 7-month issue with the ass hat that burned me. Or if you're Jericho, forgets about it the week after the angle's done in a random backstage segment that goes 8 seconds. Kind of your prototypical Dallas tag match. Babyfaces were largely in control. Lots of constant back and forth tags with both teams. Probably at the last 5 or so minutes, the heels were able to cut off the Iceman and work him over for the heat. And that allowed for Kerry to make the big fiery comeback. I believe Mercer referred to this flurry of offense as punching, flailing, and unwinding. Now, Kerry was doing a lot of that. I'm surprised we didn't get the term windmilling. The finish of this was actually pretty awesome. The Super D's tried to cheap shot Kerry during the comeback, but while they went to shoot the Iceman off the ropes, Kerry is perched on the top rope ready to hit a diving crossbody. Meanwhile, the Iceman catches the other one with the hip attack at the same time. So the people pop for the babyface counter and simultaneously sharded themselves when Kerry got the surprise pin. A twofer. So much for the triumphant return of the Super D's. But you know, it is Dallas. The face-to-heel ratio in terms of wins and losses, it's like 80-20. But, yeah. There you kind of have it to round out that show. Kind of a forgettable one, for being honest. And there really wasn't a whole lot happen on this one. But, yeah, the action was fun, and there was a decent amount of story cover-up. This one will probably mostly be remembered for them announcing the Texas Stadium show and kind of confirming the date for that. So, there was stuff to take away from it. But, speaking of things I need to figure out what to take away from, that WrestleMania 39 show is coming up pretty soon, right? So, here's what I have in store right now. Since the Monday podcast is going to be the Retro Raw and the SmackDown report, I think I might dedicate a third portion of the show to just kind of running down the card real briefly. I mean, we're a week out from this thing. I'm on the wiki page right now. As of now, there is one match confirmed for the first night and one match confirmed for the second night. And then everything is kind of categorized underneath as night to be continued. There are 10 matches on that part right now. So you got to figure at some point they're going to figure out what night these matches are going to take place on. Hopefully they come up with that decision in a day. Just throwing it out there. But I'm going to run down my preview predictions part on the Monday show. Just kind of give a general analysis on where I stand with the WrestleMania card. What I think the outcomes are going to be. Any of the potential fallout. We'll all discuss it on the Monday podcast. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. Until then, take care and peace out.